After 32 years of grinding, of sacrificing everything to build a $32 million company from scratch, I was finally ready to rest. I threw a party to celebrate my retirement. I should have been celebrating my future. But instead, I found myself fighting for it when I caught my son's wife slipping a strange powder into my champagne. This is the story of how a celebration of a lifetime's work turned into a battle for my life. If you believe justice should always be served, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. The leather of my CEO chair sighed as I leaned back one last time. It was a deep, weary sound, the kind you'd expect from an old friend who'd supported you for 32 years. It knew my secrets. It knew the weight of the 1,000-hour weeks, the stress of payrolls that almost didn't happen, the quiet triumph of deals closed at 3 a.m. For the first time, I felt a pang of loss, not for the job, but for the identity that was fused to this very room outside my panoramic window. The city sprawled out, a glittering, indifferent tapestry of lights against the bruised purple of twilight. I'd conquered that skyline. Metaphorically speaking, I'd built apex innovations from nothing but a few $1,000s and a chaotic mess of wires in my garage into a company someone was willing to pay $32 million for. $1 million for every year of my life I'd poured into it. My gaze drifted to the corner of my sprawling oak desk, past the gleaming awards and commemorative plaques, to the simple silver frame that had sat there since day one. It held a picture of my late wife, Sarah, taken on a picnic years before Apex was even a flicker of an idea. Her smile was effortless, radiant, the kind that could make you believe in anything. She was the one who would bring me coffee at midnight in that freezing garage. Her hands wrapped around mine, telling me I wasn't crazy. She passed before the first big contract, before the first real office, before she could see any of this. I was left with our son, Tyler, and a silent, solemn vow to give him the world she never got to see. In a way, I thought I had. I'd given him the best schools, the cars, the down payment on his house. I thought I was giving him a foundation. I'm beginning to realize I was just giving him things. The heavy oak door swung open without a knock. A sudden, violent intrusion that shattered the contemplative silence. The sound itself was an act of disrespect. Tyler stood in the doorway, his expensive suit looking rumpled, his shoulders slumped in a way that had become his default posture. And just behind him, a step to the side, like a perfectly placed chess piece, was his wife, Chloe. While my son radiated nervous energy, Chloe was a picture of serene composure. She was beautiful, impeccably dressed, and carried with her an aura of detached calm that always set my teeth on edge. A small, unreadable smile played on her lips as her eyes swept the office. Not with admiration, but with appraisal, as if she were estimating the value of the furniture. Dad. Hey. Wow. Last day. Huh, Tyler said, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his slacks. He shuffled into the room, his expensive leather shoes scuffing slightly on the polished floor. His eyes darted everywhere at the awards. The window, the ceiling, everywhere but at me. The last day, I confirmed, my voice even, betraying none of the turmoil her presence stirred in me. I gestured to the plush client chairs opposite my desk. Come in, sight down. Chloe glided in, the scent of her strong, floral perfume invading my space, and took a seat, crossing her legs with a practiced elegance. Tyler, however, remained standing, pacing restlessly in front of the window like a caged animal. "Big party tomorrow," he mumbled, his back to me, as he stared out at the city. "Gotta be quite the feeling. Cashing out like that. Everyone's excited." "I hope so," I said, keeping my gaze fixed on him. It's been a long time coming. I waited. This wasn't a social call. They never were. His visits always preceded a request, a problem that needed solving with my checkbook. He finally turned to face me, the feigned casualness dropping from his face like a poorly fitting mask. It took a deep, shuddering breath, the kind a man takes before confessing a sin or asking for a miracle. "Look, Dad, I know the timing is bad. I really do. But something's come up. A situation." Chloe leaned forward slightly in her chair, her perfectly manicured hands resting on her knees. She didn't say a word, but her focus was absolute. She was a spectator at a gladiator match. Waiting for the first drop of blood, I remained silent, letting him struggle. Tyler's hands came out of his pockets, and he slammed one of them down hard on the solid oak. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. The silver picture frame of my wife rattled, and a pen rolled off the edge of the desk, falling silently onto the thick carpet. His hand was trembling. "I need $5 million. Dad." The words hung in the air, rough, demanding, and utterly shameless. His face was flushed, a sheen of sweat on his brow. "It's a sure thing this time," he started, the words tumbling out in a torrent. He spoke of bad investments made by a partner, a betrayal, a mountain of debt he swore wasn't his fault. And then, pivoting seamlessly, he described a new, can't-miss startup idea. An app. It was always an app. This one would revolutionize something. I stopped listening to the details. It was the same story I'd heard a dozen times before, just with more zeros at the end. As he spiraled, my attention was drawn to Chloe. She wasn't looking at her frantic husband. She was looking directly at me. Her expression was calm, assessing, as Tyler's voice grew more desperate. I saw her give a slight, almost imperceptible nod. A silent command: "Press harder. Don't back down." It was in that moment that all the little pieces clicked into place. The way Tyler's hobbies suddenly changed to match hers. The way his political opinions shifted to echo hers after they married. The way he'd become distant from his old friends. Friends Chloe had deemed lacked ambition. I wasn't looking at my son and his supportive wife. I was looking at a puppet and a puppeteer. The words were Tyler's, but the melody, the entire composition, was hers. When Tyler finally ran out of steam, his shoulders heaving, I let the silence stretch for a moment, thick and uncomfortable. "Tyler, look at me." He reluctantly met my gaze, his eyes pleading. "Is this your idea?" I asked, my voice lower than usual, stripped of all warmth. "Or is it hers?" Tyler flinched as if I'd slapped him. Across from me, Chloe's smile never wavered, but a flicker of something arctic passed through her eyes. For the first time, I felt I was seeing the real her. "It's my idea," Tyler insisted, his voice cracking with a false bravado. "This has nothing to do with Chloe. She supports me. She believes in me." "I see." I leaned back in my chair, the leather sighing, its weary sigh. "In that case, the answer is no." "No. What do you mean?" No, his voice rose. tinged with disbelief. It's 5 million. You just made 32 million. For you, it's a rounding error. It's nothing. It is not nothing. Son, my patience, a resource I thought was infinite when it came to him, was wearing dangerously thin. It's my life. It's the 32 years I can never get back. It is my retirement. It's the security I have spent my entire adult life building so that when I am old and when my health fails, I don't have to worry. It is the money that was supposed to ensure I'd never, ever be a burden on you. I let that last part hang in the air between us. I will not set a torch to my future because you refuse to learn from your past. I saw the hurt in his eyes, the genuine sting of a child being denied, but it was quickly consumed by a stubborn, ugly anger. So that's it. After everything, you're just going to sit on your mountain of cash and watch me drown. I'm not watching you drown. I'm telling you to learn how to swim. I'm telling you, I won't give you $5 million. If you are serious about a new business, you come to me with a professionally prepared business plan, a detailed 5-year budget, and a market analysis. Then, we can discuss a reasonable loan with a legal contract, interest, and a strict repayment plan. I will be your investor, not your piggy bank. Trule scuffle, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed in the big office. A loan? You want me to beg for a loan from my own father? I want you to act like a man, not a spoiled child. He shook his head, looking from me to Chloe as if for a lifeline. She was now standing, her purse in her hand, the mask of profound disappointment firmly in place. It was a masterful performance. He drew his strength, his indignation, from it. If that's how you feel, then fine, he said, his voice turning petulant and cold. We won't come to your party tomorrow. We can't possibly celebrate your success when you're so clearly happy to watch us fail. It was emotional blackmail of the highest order, a childish threat designed to hit me where I was weakest. My love for him, the idea of standing in a room full of people, celebrating this monumental achievement without my only son, felt like a physical blow. The party was meant to be the culmination of our family's journey. Now it felt like a funeral for it. I looked at Chloe. She was placing a comforting hand on Tyler's arm. All for show. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this ultimatum was her final, calculated move. I tried one last time, a father's last, a foolish attempt to bridge a chasm that was too wide. Let's not end it like this, I said, my voice softer now. Weary. The party is for the whole family. It always was. Why don't you invite Frank and Brenda? We can all be together. We can talk things through properly, like adults. Frank and Brenda were Chloe's parents. Good, salt of the earth people I'd always respected. My desperate hope was that their grounded presence might dilute their daughter's venom, might remind my son of what normal family decency looked like. Tyler just stared at me, his jaw set in a line of stubborn resentment. Chloe answered for him, her voice dripping with a poisonous, false sweetness that was more insulting than any shout. I think we've said everything that needs to be said. Dad, she said, the word dad sounding like an epithet. We would hate to cast a shadow on your big night. And with that, they turned and walked out. They didn't slam the door. They closed it softly. A quiet, final click that echoed the sound of a closing casket lid. I sat there for a long time, the silence of the office pressing in on me, heavier than it had ever been. I slowly stood and walked to the window. The glittering city lights that had once represented opportunity and triumph now seemed mocking, distant, and cold. The $32 million in my bank account suddenly felt like the loneliest money in the world. My celebration, the culmination of my life's work. There was scheduled for the next evening. But the joy had been expertly, surgically excised, replaced by a hollow, cavernous ache in my chest. I had a terrible, sinking feeling that the party wouldn't be a celebration at all. I was a general who had won the war, only to come home and find the enemy sleeping in my son's bed. I was celebrating a lifetime of achievement, but it felt more like I was walking onto a battlefield. That night, sleep was a stranger. I lay in the dark, the silence of my large, empty house, amplifying the echo of that softly closed office door. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Tyler's face, not as the bright-eyed boy I'd raised, but as a hollowed-out man, his features twisted by a resentment I couldn't comprehend. And behind him, always, was Chloe's serene, smiling mask. The $32 million felt less like a triumph and more like a curse. A giant, glittering target painted on my back. I had built an empire to give my son a better life. And in doing so, I had somehow made him believe he was entitled to burn it all for warmth. I finally drifted off, just as the first gray hint of dawn was breaking, and the sleep I found was dreamless and heavy, offering no rest at all. The next evening, my home was transformed. Caterers moved with practiced, silent efficiency through rooms that were suddenly filled with the warm glow of artfully placed lighting. A jazz trio played softly in the corner of the grand living room, their smooth melodies weaving through the gentle hum of conversation and the clinking of crystal glasses. The air smelled of expensive perfume, seared scallops, and old money. My friends, my real friends, and loyal colleagues from decades past were all there. They clapped me on the back, shook my hand with genuine warmth, and shared stories that made us all laugh. They were celebrating me. Ned, the man who had built a company from scratch, the friend they'd known for years. I smiled. I laughed. I accepted their congratulations. But underneath the bespoke suit and the gracious host persona, I was a wreck. A cold, hard knot of anxiety sat in the pit of my stomach. Every time the doorbell chimed, I felt a yacht, a mixture of dread and a foolish, fatherly hope. I wanted him to be there. I just didn't know if I could stand the sight of him. And then, they arrived. The hum of the party seemed to dip for a moment as they stepped through the front door. Tyler and Chloe and her parents, Frank and Brenda. Tyler was holding a ridiculously large bottle of vintage champagne. Wrapped in gold foil, he held it out in front of him like a shield. Chloe was radiant in an emerald green dress that probably cost more than my first car. A dazzling smile fixed on her face. Frank and Brenda, as always, looked kind, a little overwhelmed, and genuinely happy to be there. They made their way toward me through the crowd. I braced myself. It was Tyler who spoke first, his eyes fixed on a point just over my left shoulder. Dad, we wanted to apologize for yesterday. He held out the bottle of champagne. I was out of line, completely. I was stressed, and I took it out on you. And that wasn't fair. I'm really sorry. The words sounded rehearsed, as if he'd been practicing them in the car on the way over. Before I could respond, Chloe stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me in a sudden, firm hug. "We're so proud of you, Dad," she whispered into my ear, her voice thick with a convincing imitation of emotion. "You're his hero. You know, he just gets tongue-tied trying to express it." The hug was a performance. There was no warmth in it. Only the rigid press of her arms and the cloying scent of her perfume. It was a strategic maneuver, designed to disarm me and present a united, loving front to anyone who might be watching. I patted her back awkwardly, feeling the cold silk of her dress. "Thank you, Chloe." I took the bottle from Tyler. This wasn't necessary. But thank you. I looked my son in the eye, searching for a flicker of sincerity, a sign that the boy I raised was still in there. All I found was a kind of weary relief, the look of a man who had completed a difficult but necessary chore. He was sorry he'd been caught, not sorry for what he'd done. The performance, however, was just beginning. Chloe was magnificent. She became the perfect daughter-in-law, a whirlwind of charm and grace. She floated through the party, her laughter tinkling like wind chimes. She engaged my oldest friends in conversations about their grandchildren, complimented my former business partners on their successes, and even helped one of the caterers clean up a small spill, all with a disarming humility. She was the picture of perfection, effortlessly weaving herself into the fabric of my life, making everyone believe she belonged there. Tyler trailed in her wake, looking more relaxed now that the apology was over, content to let her shine. I watched her from across the room, a glass of my favorite single malt scotch in my hand. It was an incredible act. If I hadn't been in my office the day before, I would have been completely fooled. I would have thought, he's a lucky man. She's exactly what he needs. But I had been there, and as I watched her charm my lawyer, a man who had known me for 30 years, I caught her eye. She smiled at me, a brilliant, loving smile, and for a split second, her gaze flickered from my face down to the specific glass in my hand. Then back up again. It was a momentary glance, almost imperceptible, but it wasn't loving. It was sharp, cold, and appraising. It was the look of a predator identifying its target. The knot in my stomach tightened into a ball of ice. Just then, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I glanced at the screen. It was my lawyer, David, the same man Chloe was talking to. I frowned. He excused himself from her and walked towards me. "Sorry to bother you." "Ned," he said, keeping his voice low. "It's about the final transfer wire. The buyer's bank is having a minor protocol issue. It's nothing to worry about. But I need to jump on a quick call with them, and I need a verbal confirmation from you on one of the clauses. It won't take 5 minutes." "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "Let's step into my study." My study was my sanctuary, a room lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, filled with the scent of old paper and leather. It was the one room in the house that was truly mine. I led David in and closed the heavy oak door, leaving it just slightly ajar, a habit I'd developed, so I could still hear if I was needed outside. While he dialed, I walked over to the small, built-in bar to set down my scotch. And then I stopped. My glass. I had left it on the mantelpiece in the living room when David had approached me. David was speaking into his phone now, using his crisp, legal jargon. I stood there, my back to him, looking through the narrow crack of the open door. My line of sight was perfect. I could see a slice of the party, a moving portrait of my life, and I could see the mantelpiece. And then I saw her, Chloe. She detached herself from a conversation with a grace that was almost feline. She drifted toward the fireplace, looking around as if admiring a painting on the wall. Her movements were casual, unhurried. No one was watching her. Everyone was caught up in their own conversations. She reached the mantelpiece. She glanced quickly toward the study door. I held my breath, standing perfectly still. She couldn't see me. With a speed and efficiency that was terrifying, she reached into her small, glittering clutch purse. Her fingers emerged with a small, folded paper packet, the kind that might hold a dose of powdered medicine. Her back was mostly to the room now, shielding her actions. Her movements were small, precise. She unfolded the packet over my glass of amber liquid. A fine, white powder, almost invisible, cascaded into my scotch. She didn't stir it with her finger. She was too smart for that. Instead, she picked up the glass, her manicured fingers careful not to smudge the sides, and gave it a single, gentle swirl, the kind of swirl a connoisseur would give it before tasting. The powder dissolved instantly, leaving no trace. She placed the glass back on the mantelpiece in the exact same spot. Then she refolded the small paper, slipped it back into her purse, and turned around, a serene smile back on her face as she rejoined a nearby group. The entire act took less than 10 seconds. The phone in David's hand might as well have been a million miles away. The sound of his voice faded into a dull, meaningless roar in my ears. The blood drained from my face, and for a terrifying second, I thought my knees would buckle. The room seemed to tilt, the books on the shelves blurring into a meaningless swirl of color. This wasn't a greedy daughter-in-law. This wasn't about $5 million. This was a monster. She had smiled at me, hugged me, and then, with the casual indifference of someone swatting a fly, she had tried to kill me, in my own home, surrounded by my friends. On the night I was meant to be celebrating the culmination of my life, the sheer, breathtaking audacity of it, the absolute cold-blooded evil, was more than my mind could process. The pain was a physical thing, a white-hot blade twisting deep in my chest. It wasn't just betrayal. It was an annihilation of everything I thought I knew about my son, my family, my life. Ned, are you there? David's voice cut through the fog. It blinked, forcing the room back into focus. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs. Affrontique. Trapped bird. My hand, when I raised it, was trembling. And then, something shifted. The white-hot pain didn't vanish, but it cooled, hardening into something else. It condensed into a single, sharp point of ice-cold rage. The kind of rage that doesn't scream, but thinks. The kind of rage that doesn't break things, but builds traps. I was not going to die tonight. I was not going to be a victim in my own story. She had mistaken my kindness for weakness, my generosity for foolishness. She had made a fatal error in judgment. She thought I hadn't seen her. A plan, sudden and fully formed, crystallized in my mind. It was risky. It was cruel. And it was perfect. Yes. David, I'm here, I said, and I was shocked at how calm and steady my own voice sounded. Authorize it. Everything is in order. I ended the call, took a deep, steadying breath, and smoothed the front of my jacket. My hand was no longer shaking. I opened the door to my study and stepped back out into the party. The jazz music was still playing. People were still laughing. Nothing had changed. And everything had changed. I saw Frank, Chloe's father, a good man who deserved none of this, standing near the bar, talking animatedly with an old colleague of mine. He was a few feet away from the mantelpiece, a few feet away from the glass. I fixed a pleasant, neutral expression on my face and began to walk toward him. Every step felt deliberate, heavy with purpose. Showtime. Chắc chắn rồi. Nối tiếp ngay lập tức từ khoảnh khắc quyết định ở cuối chương trước. Đây là chương tiếp theo của câu chuyện, được triển khai với chiều sâu cảm xúc và chi tiết hơn. Tuân thủ nghiêm ngặt, giản ý và tất cả các yêu cầu của bạn. My feet felt like lead, but I forced them to move, one step after the other, carrying me across the plush Persian rug. The jazz trio was playing a smooth, easy melody, a soundtrack utterly at odds with the Arctic resolve that had encased my heart. Outwardly, I was just the host, mingling. I forced a smile for a neighbor, nodded at a former board member, but inwardly, I was a different man from the one who had entered the study just minutes before. The heartbroken father was gone, replaced by a strategist. The rage and the pain were still there, but they were no longer a chaotic storm. They were fuel, refined and potent, powering a cold, precise engine of justice. My target was Frank, Chloe's father. He was a good man, a retired civil engineer who spoke passionately about bridges and his prize-winning roses. He was laughing now. A deep, honest belly, laugh at something my old colleague, George, had said. He held a glass of club soda with a lime, his drink of choice for the last decade. Using him felt like a betrayal in itself, a necessary stain on my soul. But there was no other way. He was the perfect, unsuspecting pawn. George Frank, I hope you two aren't solving the world's problems without me, I said, my voice sounding impossibly normal, jovial even. They both turned, their faces beaming. Ned, there's the man of the hour, Frank boomed, clapping me on the shoulder with a hand as solid as the foundations he used to lay. Brenda and I were just saying, it's a magnificent party, a truly fitting celebration for a magnificent career. You're too kind, Frank, I said, my smile feeling like a mask I was holding in place with sheer willpower. I'm just glad you all could be here. It wouldn't be the same without friends. My eyes swept the room, and I saw her. Chloe was watching us. Not intently, just a casual glance over the rim of her champagne flute. But she was watching. She needed to see this. She needed to see me approach the glass. My own glass, the one containing her poison, sat on the mantelpiece. Just to Frank's right, the amber liquid caught the light, looking so innocent, so inviting. Actually, Frank, speaking of magnificent, I said, turning my body slightly, guiding his attention away from the bar and toward the wall behind him. Did I ever show you this painting? It's a new acquisition. A landscape from a local artist Sarah and I used to admire. It was a simple, serene painting of the coastline. Frank, a man who appreciated craftsmanship in all its forms, leaned in, genuinely interested. Oh, that's beautiful. Ned, the light on the water is just incredible. This was it. As he was focused on the brushstrokes, I moved with a fluid economy of motion I didn't know I possessed. I reached out, my left hand picking up his club soda from the bar. My right hand moved simultaneously, picking up my poisoned scotch from the mantelpiece. For a fraction of a second, I held them both. Then, in one smooth, unbroken movement, I placed the scotch down where his club soda had been and brought the club soda up to my own hand, as if I'd simply been clearing a space to better admire the art. To anyone watching, it would have looked like a simple, unconscious, tidying gesture. She always said it looked like the view from that little cottage we rented in Maine. The summer Tyler turned 10. I continued, my voice perfectly even, my heart a cold, heavy drum in my chest. I can see that, Frank said, turning back. He didn't even glance at the glasses. Why would he? His attention was on the conversation. My hand was steady as I held his club soda, but I could feel the phantom weight of the other glass, the one now sitting in front of him, waiting. Just then, Chloe glided over, her emerald dress shimmering under the soft lights. The timing was perfect. She had seen me at the mantelpiece, and now she was here to nudge the final piece into place. "Dad," she said, her voice a silken purr. "Everyone is waiting. I think it's time for your speech. Don't you time for a toast." She smiled at me. A brilliant, predatory smile. There was an eagerness in her eyes, a feverish anticipation that made my stomach churn. She was ready to watch her plan come to fruition. "You're right, my dear," I said, matching her smile with my own mask of paternal affection. "It's time." I turned and walked to the center of the room, tapping a spoon gently against my glass of club soda. The light, clear chime cut through the warm hum of conversation. The jazz trio faded out, one by one. Conversations dwindled as 100 pairs of eyes turned to me. The room fell into an expectant silence. I saw Tyler, my son, standing near the front, his chest puffed out with a vicarious pride. He had no idea. He was a fool. My fool. And I loved him and hated him for it in that single, agonizing moment. I cleared my throat. "My dear friends, my family," I began, my voice resonating in the quiet room. Thank you. Thank you all for being here tonight to mark this transition. 32 years is a long time. I look out at all of you, and I see the faces that were there for the journey, the late nights, the impossible deadlines, the risks that paid off, and the ones that, well, the ones that taught us lessons. A ripple of warm laughter went through the crowd. I let my gaze travel over them, making eye contact, sharing a nod, a smile. I was drawing them in, making them part of this moment. They say you build a company with steel and glass, with code and capital. I continued, my voice gaining strength. But that's not true. You build it with people. You build it with trust. You build it with loyalty. I let that word hang in the air for a moment, and I looked toward Chloe. She was still smiling, but a flicker of impatience was visible in the way she shifted her weight. This wasn't the short, celebratory speech she was expecting. "Loyalty," I repeated, more softly this time. "It's a rare and precious thing. It's not something you can demand. It has to be earned, and it's certainly not something you can buy. It's a bond, forged in respect and mutual affection. It is the bedrock of any family, of any meaningful legacy." I took a slow, deliberate breath. And family is everything. It's supposed to be the one safe harbor in any storm. The place you can turn to, knowing, without a doubt, that the people there have your best interests at heart, that they will protect you, cherish you, and honor you. I paused, and I looked directly at Tyler. He was beaming, completely missing the iron edge that had crept into my voice. Then, I shifted my gaze to his wife. I locked eyes with her across the room. Her smile had faltered now, just slightly. A hint of confusion was clouding her perfect features. The air in the room had grown heavy, charged with an unspoken tension that only she and I could feel. I've built my entire life on a foundation of honesty and transparency. Everyone in this room who has ever worked with me knows that I believe the truth, no matter how difficult, is the only way forward. That is the legacy I am proud of. More than the money. More than the buildings. More than the name on the door. I raised my glass, the one that should have been hers. And so, I cannot begin this new chapter of my life with a lie. I lowered the glass. The silence in the room was now absolute, profound. The festive atmosphere had evaporated, replaced by a thick, anxious stillness. Even the caterers had stopped moving. Everyone was staring at me, their faces a mixture of confusion and concern. What lie? I kept my eyes locked on Chloe. Her face had gone pale beneath her perfect makeup. The confusion had been replaced by a dawning, sickening realization. She knew. She didn't know how, but she knew that I knew. My voice, when I spoke again, was not loud, but it cut through the silence like a shard of glass. Before we raise our glasses in a toast to the future, I said, each word clear and precise. I have one question for my dear daughter-in-law. Chloe, what did you put in my drink? A collective gasp went through the room. It was a soft, sibilant sound, like the tide going out, leaving behind a barren, silent shore. Tyler's proud smile collapsed, as if his strings had been cut. He stared at me, then at his wife, his face a mask of utter bewilderment. Chloe's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming truck, her eyes wide with pure, unadulterated panic. Dad, what are you talking about? She finally stammered, her voice a high, thin whisper that barely carried. I don't understand. Oh, I think you do, I said, my voice still dangerously calm. I'm talking about the glass of scotch I left on the mantelpiece. The one you so graciously doctored from me while I was in my study. But you see, here's the thing about a good plan. It pays to watch all the pieces on the board. My gaze shifted from her and I pointed, not at the mantelpiece, but at the bar, directly at the glass of scotch, now sitting in front of her father. I don't want to make a scene, I said, my voice laced with a cold, false reason. So let's just be civilized about this. Why don't we take that glass, the one Frank is about to drink from, and send it to a lab? I'm sure it's all a misunderstanding. I'm sure it will come back completely clean. Frank looked down at the amber liquid in front of him as if it were a coiled snake. His face, which had been ruddy with laughter moments before, was now ashen. The crowd followed his gaze, and a wave of horrified understanding rippled through them. They all understood the implication. They all saw the trap I had laid. And Chloe saw it too. She was cornered. There was no escape. There was no lie big enough to cover this. I saw the calculation in her eyes, as a frantique. last-ditch effort to find a way out. And then, pure, animal panic took over. "No," she shrieked, the sound tearing through the silence. She lunged forward, not toward me, but toward her father. It wasn't a stumble. It wasn't a trip. It was a desperate, deliberate, dive. Her hand shot out, not to grab the glass, but to smash it. She swiped at it, her movements clumsy and frantic. Her hand connected with Frank's arm. The heavy crystal tumbler flew from the bar. For a surreal moment, it seemed to hang in the air, the amber liquid and the ice cubes suspended in time. Then it fell. The sound of it shattering on the marble floor was like a gunshot. It was a sharp, violent crack that made everyone flinch. The scotch splashed across the floor, and glittering shards of crystal scattered like fallen stars. A dead, ringing silence descended upon the room. Nothing could be heard but the faint, fading tinkle of the last piece of glass settling on the floor. Chloe stood frozen, her hands still outstretched, her chest heaving. Her face was a canvas of pure terror. Her wordless, violent act was a confession more damning than any words she could have ever spoken. The mask was not just broken, it had been utterly, irrevocably annihilated, and everyone had seen it. Tyler stared at her, his face ashen, his mouth hanging open and dawning. Abject horror. He was finally, truly, seeing his wife for the very first time. The sound of the shattering glass was the sound of a life breaking. It echoed in the profound, tomb-like silence of the room. A sharp, crystalline exclamation point on my accusation. For a long, suspended moment, no one moved. No one breathed. We were all statues in a grotesque tableau, our eyes fixed on the glittering, toxic mess on my marble floor. The amber liquid, my favorite single malt scotch, was already seeping into the grout. The ice cubes looking like fallen diamonds amidst the wreckage. The evidence was destroyed. But in its destruction, the proof of guilt was absolute. Chloe stood frozen, her hand still held awkwardly in the air, her chest heaving with ragged, panicked breaths. Her face, which had been a carefully constructed mask of beauty and poise, had utterly collapsed. What was left was something raw and ugly. Her eyes wide and animalistic, darting around the room as if seeking an escape route from a trap that had already snapped shut. She was no longer a puppeteer. She was a cornered thing. Her mouth opened, and a strange, strangled sound came out. It was an accident, she stammered, the words sounding flimsy and pathetic in the heavy silence. He tripped. I just tripped. No one believed her. Not a single person in that room. You could feel the collective judgment settle over her. A weight as palpable as a physical shroud. It wasn't loud or angry. It was something far worse. A quiet, complete, and universal contempt. Her lie was so transparent it was an insult to our shared intelligence. Then, slowly, as if moving through deep water, Tyler turned. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at the shattered glass. He looked at his wife. All the manufactured pride, all the blustering entitlement had drained away from him, leaving behind a man who looked hollowed out, fragile, and terrifyingly sober for the first time. "Chloe," he whispered, his voice barely audible, cracked and broken. "Did you—" He couldn't finish the question. He didn't need to. The answer was in the frantic, terrified trembling of her body. She finally seemed to see him, to register his presence as a potential lifeline. "Tyler, honey, listen to me," she pleaded, taking a step toward him, her hand reaching for his arm. "He's twisting things. He's trying to frame me. It's about the money. Don't you see?" The moment her fingers brushed the sleeve of his suit jacket, he recoiled. It was a violent, convulsive movement, as if her touch had burned him. "Don't," he choked out, taking a step back from her. "Don't touch me." He stared at her, truly stared at her, and I could see the terrible, agonizing timeline of his own foolishness playing out behind his eyes. The little manipulations, the whispered suggestions, the way she had slowly isolated him and poisoned his mind against his own father. He was seeing it all now, in one devastating, life-altering flash of clarity. The woman he loved, the woman for whom he had been willing to sacrifice his relationship with me, was a monster, and he had been her willing accomplice. He looked from her horrified face to mine, and what I saw in his eyes broke what was left of my heart. It was a bottomless well of shame, regret, and a sorrow so profound it seemed to steal the very air from his lungs. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't have to. His entire being was an apology. He turned back to Chloe, his face ashen. He grabbed her by her upper arm, his grip not gentle. "We're leaving," he said, his voice flat and dead. "No, Tyler, you have to listen to me," she cried, trying to pull away. Now, the word was a command, spoken with a finality I had never heard from him before. He began to pull her toward the door, through the silent, watching crowd who parted for them like the Red Sea. She stumbled after him, still protesting, still trying to weave a new web of lies. But no one was listening anymore. Her performance was over. As they reached the grand entryway, Tyler paused and looked back at me one last time. His eyes were glistening with unshed tears. Then, in a voice so low it was almost lost in the cavernous space, he said, "You destroyed us." It wasn't an accusation directed at me. It was a verdict, delivered to the woman he was holding. A final, heartbreaking acknowledgement of the ruin she had wrought. He opened the door, pulled her out into the night, and closed it firmly behind them. The click of the latch echoed the one from my office the day before, but this one felt different. That was the sound of a declaration of war. This was the sound of an execution. In the aftermath of their exit, a new kind of silence fell, one filled with awkwardness and pity. Then, I heard a soft, wrenching sob. It was Brenda, Chloe's mother. She stood beside her husband, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with a grief that was painful to watch. Frank stood stiffly beside her, his arms wrapped around her. But his own face was a portrait of utter devastation. He looked like a man whose world had just been bombed into rubble. He looked 10 years older than he had 10 minutes ago. Slowly, he led his weeping wife over to me. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked down at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. "Ned," he began, his voice thick and hoarse. There are no words. There are no words to say how sorry, how ashamed we are." He finally looked up at me, his eyes swimming with a mortified pain. "We raised her better than this. I swear to you, we did. I don't know what she became. I just don't know." This was the part of my plan I hadn't fully considered the collateral damage. These were good people, caught in the blast radius of their daughter's evil. Looking at their shattered faces, my cold rage finally dissipated, leaving behind only a profound, weary sadness. I placed a hand on Frank's shoulder. It was trembling. "This is not your fault, Frank," I said, my voice softer than it had been all night. "You and Brenda are good people. I've always known that. This isn't on you. This is on her. And her alone. Don't carry a burden that isn't yours to bear." Frank just nodded, unable to speak, and squeezed my arm in a gesture of silent, grateful anguish. He gently led Brenda away. And soon, a exodus began. People came up to me, one by one. There were no more congratulations. They offered a quiet handshake, a firm hand on my shoulder, and a look of profound respect and sympathy in their eyes. George, my oldest colleague, was the last to leave. He stood with me for a moment, looking at the mess on the floor. "You handled that with incredible strength, Ned," he said quietly, "but a hell of a price to pay for your retirement. Some prices you don't get to choose." "George?" I replied. He nodded, squeezed my shoulder, and then he was gone. And then I was alone. The house was cavernously silent. The ghosts of conversation and laughter seemed to hang in the air, mingling with the lingering scent of perfume and expensive food. The jazz trio had packed up and left. The caterers had cleared everything away with a quiet, deferential efficiency. Everything, except for the glittering shards of glass on the floor. They had asked if I wanted them to clean it, but I had told them to leave it. I needed to look at it. I walked over and stared down at the wreckage of my party. It was the physical manifestation of the last 24 hours of my life, a beautiful thing, shattered and poisoned. Slowly, I went to the bar. I ignored the open bottles. I reached under the counter and pulled out a brand new, unopened bottle of the same single malt scotch. I broke the seal, the crackle of the plastic, loud in the silence. I took a clean, heavy crystal tumbler from the shelf and poured myself 2 fingers. I took the glass into my study and sat down in my favorite leather armchair. I took a sip. The scotch was smooth, beety, and clean. It tasted like sanity. I took a deep, shuddering breath, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt the tight, brutal knot of tension in my chest begin to loosen. I felt the unclench of a fist in my gut I didn't even realize I'd been making. The battle was over. I had won, but it felt nothing like a victory. I had thought the money was the problem, that the $32 million was a corrupting influence, but I realized now that I was wrong. The money hadn't corrupted them. It had simply revealed the corruption that was already there. It was a catalyst, a giant magnifying glass that had exposed the rot at the core of my son's marriage, and the weakness in his own character. I thought about Tyler, my son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the teenager I had taught to drive. I had tried to give him everything, and in the process, I had failed to give him the one thing he truly needed, a backbone. I felt a surge of pity for him, a deep and sorrowful ache for the man he could have been, and the man he had allowed himself to become. I had lost him, maybe not forever, but for now, and that was a grief I would have to learn to live with. My eyes fell upon a large, antique globe that stood in the corner of my study, a gift from Sarah on our 10th anniversary. I stood up and walked over to it, running my hand over the smooth, curved surface. My fingers traced the coast of Italy, the mountains of Peru, the islands of Japan, places I had always dreamed of seeing but had always been too busy to visit. Too busy building a legacy for a son who had just tried to have me poisoned. A strange, quiet feeling washed over me. It wasn't happiness. Not yet. It was something more profound. It was peace. The chains. I hadn't even known I was wearing the chain of obligation, of expectation, of a father's endless, thankless duty had been shattered, along with that glass on the floor. The $32 million was no longer a target on my back. It was a key. It was a plane ticket. It was a full tank of gas. It was freedom. I stood there for a long time, in the quiet of my home, with a clean glass in my hand and a world at my fingertips. The party was over. My old life was over. And for the first time, my retirement had truly begun.